simply start with the 3-minute introductory piece, and I will let Michelle, please, you may begin.
Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Michelle Caldier, and first of all, I want to thank you so much for coming out regularly in the morning. I mean, it's pretty early. So I want to tell you a little bit about myself and why I'm running for office. I was born and raised here in Bremerton. I come from a long line of Kitsap County residents. My great-grandfather was the very first postmaster here in Silverdale. And I'm a proud Central Kitsap High School graduate. I went to Olympic College and then earned my transfer degree and went to the University of Washington, and that's where I earned my bachelor's and then went on to earn my doctorate and achieve my childhood dream of becoming a dentist. And while I was in dental school, I recognized the need for quality oral care in the nursing home population. And upon graduation, I devoted my entire practice to improving access to care for the frail seniors. You know, a lot of people have asked me, so, okay, you're a nursing home dentist. Why on earth are you running for state representative? And it's because last year there were these horrible bills that would have had somebody with about a year of training to do surgery on the poor, which included my nursing home folks. And I said to myself, wait a second, this isn't right. Some of these were procedures that I wouldn't do as a dentist. I'd have a specialist do. So why on earth would we have someone with even less training doing it just because they're poor or they live in nursing homes? So I went down to Olympia and I started knocking on doors and doing everything I could to help defeat these bills. And in that process, that's when I learned that some of the people who had signed on to those bills didn't even know what those procedures were. You know, and I also took a step back and I looked at what makes up the legislature. And I kind of realized that there's certain professions that are very well represented in Olympia. We have a ton of attorneys there. We have a lot of policy analysts, have a lot of political science people, but we really don't have that many people from the community. In fact, there's currently nobody there who's worked in elder care. There's nobody who understands the foster care system like I do. There's nobody who understands billing for Medicare and Medicaid like I do. And I have certain unique qualities that I believe could make a huge difference, not only in our community, but in the entire state. And that's why I'm running for office. And I want to thank you very much for your guys' support. Thanks.
Okay, we'll let Larry speak next, please. 3 minutes.
Good morning, I'm Larry Seacrest, and I do think, as Michelle said, one of the most important questions any voter can ask any candidate is, why are you doing this? Why are you running? And it's a question that I ask myself and answer every time I do run for re-election. That made me think about the first time I had to ask that question, when a group of friends, one of whom, George Robeson, is actually sitting here in the audience. Several years ago, a group of friends and neighbors in Gig Harbor came over and asked me to run for office. Actually, they met with my wife Carla and me and asked one of us to run for office. And my first answer was, Carla decided no, she wanted to continue being a writer. And my first answer was, of course, no. In fact, it was, hell no, I'm busy. And they said, well, what are you busy at? And I said, well, I'm busy doing democracy. I said, well, that's interesting. Where do you do this? And I said, well, during my Navy career, I did peace through firepower. When there was a spot in the world that was in trouble, as commanding officer of a warship, I would be sent there to patrol off those coasts, and by the mere presence of American firepower, the local area would be a little more peaceful, a little less violent, and America would be a little more safe. But I realized, as I told these folks 10 years ago, that that didn't work anymore. Peace through firepower, and you can see in today's newspaper, by the way, that really doesn't work, at least where I used to work. So I said, I have started working for the last 10, 12 years. I've been working in these war zones doing democracy, trying to help the local people figure out, how do you manage your own affairs without firepower so that you can become a little more peaceful and a little less violent. And they said, well, you know, that sounds pretty good. Why don't you do that here? I said, well, as a matter of fact, I have started doing that here. I'm now working in American cities, including the city of Seattle. Well, that conversation and several repeat conversations, I finally got to the place where Carla and I agreed that I would say yes. And it was next to the decision to marry that wonderful woman, the best decision I've made, because in the last few years I've been doing democracy from the inside. The reason why I am running now is because I am angry and concerned about the state of our democracy here in this state. And you're going to hear more this morning and during the campaign the rest of this season about what I think we need to do to get our democracy in this state and in this community back on track. Thank you.
All right, thank you all for applauding. And now, that was one of my rules that I neglected to, is I'm going to ask, so you all caught me, very good. So I'm going to ask that from this point forward, we all hold your clapping and applauding as we go through the question and answers and the summaries. And at the very end, you all can unleash that pent-up applaud and just bring the roof down on these people, okay? So I please kindly ask you to hold the applause and we'll get through this accordingly. So now with that, we move on to our question and answer period. And candidates get 1 minute to answer the questions. And I have like 5 questions related to the same topic, so I might give the candidates an extra double minutes because there apparently is some really strong concern over an educational issue coming from the audience today. I was really surprised to see the duplicity of that magnitude. I never had that happen before. But now, in order to get you all started, we got a little, what I call a little warm-up question for you all coming from the audience. Audience member asked, this goes to Larry for starters, please. What is your first priority when the session begins in Olympia? What is your first priority? Larry.
My number 1 priority, hands down, is to make sure that the leadership in the House and the Senate, and I'm standing with the governor, are prepared to be adults during the next session. This legislature is facing a huge set of problems of transportation, education funding, mental health funding, culverts, probably more heavy lifting to be done in the next year than in the last decade. And we're going to need nonpartisan cooperation, bipartisan adults in Olympia. And that's my goal. And it's something I'm going to keep talking to you about during the campaign because that won't happen in Olympia unless you feel connected to and are insisting on that kind of adult behavior in Olympia.
Thank you.
So my number 1 priority is to work collaboratively together and come up with real solutions for some of the problems that we have in our state. We have horrible bipartisan gridlock that's been happening and getting worse over the last decade while my opponent's been in office. And I can tell you that with my background, my history, and also serving as the chair for the Access to Care Committee, I can take a large group of people and come together and say, you know what is it that we want and what is it we can do together as a team? I personally believe to have people from different backgrounds coming together makes it much better to come up with a good solution.
Thank you. So moving on, now we want to get into what a lot of folks are interested in. It has to do with money. So the question goes to Michelle. And the question is, how do you feel about out-of-state money funding local campaigns?
You know, it's very interesting that was brought up because I think we all saw last year what happened with outside money coming in and really doing a lot of nasty things, tax. I'm very proud of the fact that for me, I believe around 90% of my donors have come from individual people. Not from major corporations, not from outside interests, but just from people. And I believe that that is how a campaign should be ran. It should be from people. That's how our country was founded. It should be about the people, for the people, and that's what I'm standing for. Thank you.
So I was talking to you about democracy. The Citizens United decision, the Supreme Court disastrous decision to allow unlimited money in political campaigns is beginning to infect Washington State. We saw it last year in the Slicker Angel race where each side was boosted by extraordinary amounts of outside money. Big outside money does not come to be constructive, it does not come to do democracy, it comes to be nasty. And it makes our politics more and more impoverished, more and more hostile. Voters are being turned off about that. So my concern about big money is that voters are being driven out of participation. And the very problems that we need to be working on, they won't listen to because they think it's just all big money hogwash. We have to change that.
Thank you. So now, staying on the question of money, we have another audience member who asked a question, and this goes to Larry. San Francisco has a living wage for many years. Seattle has other employee benefit laws. Both cities have strong economies. What is your position on local employment laws? Larry.
There's two things the questioner may have in mind. One is the minimum wage, where we've got some people, some cities here, SeaTac, Seattle, talking about $15 wage. Although this disappoints my Democrat friends, I strongly oppose that $15 minimum wage, especially when it comes city by city. So my view is that in that dimension, this needs to be uniform statewide. We have the highest minimum wage across the country. It automatically escalates. I just don't think we ought to get into this measles where one district is trying to compete with the other. So let me stop at that side of that particular local control issue.
Okay, thank you. Michelle, same question.
So when I was 17, I was out on my own. I had 3 minimum wage jobs, and I was supporting not only myself, but my younger sister and her friend. And that time, minimum wage went up, and I thought, sweet, this is going to be the solution to all my problems. I'm gonna make more money, I'm gonna be able to pay, more of my bills better, I'm gonna have all of these better things going on because the minimum wage went up. But guess what? That same day that minimum wage went up, I worked at Kentucky Fried Chicken at the time, and guess what? Their prices went up too. Everything else around me went up. And in fact, I was still poor. And so if increasing the minimum wage was the pathway out of poverty, I would be for it. Instead, I am for other solutions to get people out of poverty. And one of those is strengthening our education system. Another one is making sure that higher education is more affordable. My daughter's getting ready to go to the University of Washington. And thanks to my opponent's leadership, her college tuition is so much more expensive. It is almost $100,000 for a child to go to the University of Washington for a 4-year degree. That's not right. That's not affordable. I'm a dentist, and I'm telling you, if I can't afford it, a lot of people, the average person can't do it either.
Thank you. All right, so now moving on to another topic that is close to the heart of a lot of folks in this room, has to do with those boats taking us across the water, right? So the question to you, Michelle, is how has the failure to pass the transportation bill led to the current ferry system problems?
Our current ferry system, it costs about 1/3 of our transportation dollars. So 1/3 of our transportation dollars goes towards the ferry system. I'm a ferry commuter myself, and I can tell you that those dollars are not being utilized wisely. And I think that before we can come up with some of the solutions to these problems, what we really need to do is look at what the problem is and who exactly is involved in that. For example, bigger corporations, our state legislature passed a law stating that bigger corporations is the only company that's allowed to manufacture ferries in our state. It just so happens that bigger corporations also charges 2.5 times more per ferry to build. So instead of it costing $32 million for a ferry, it costs $80 million. Okay, that's a lot of money. That's not right. Coincidentally, it just so happens that bigger corporations happens to be one of my opponent's top donors to his campaign. In fact, he's even listed it on one of his supporters on that paper there. And I can tell you right now, I'm not going to get a check from bigger corporations. And you know why? That's because I represent people, and that's what this is about.
Thank you. Larry, same question.
You just had 2 buckets of hogwash. Absolutely. Both on higher ed. That's absolutely boiling. I'm the person who stopped the cuts, put $500 million back into tuition, back into higher education, insisted that we have 0 tuition increases. That was me. On the ferry system, it is, by the way, Michelle, the numbers are right. It's $123 million, which is outrageous, not 88. It should be $72 million if it was bought on the open market, and there is no law that requires vigor to do this. In fact, one of the problems is that the ferry system doesn't know how to contract. So what you've just heard is 2 buckets of baloney about what's actually going on. I'm hoping that we'll have more questions, so we should talk about what the fixes are to the ferry system.
All right, thank you. So, as a matter of fact, funny you should ask that, Larry, because we have to have
Ready?
The audience drives this. So, this question has to do with accountability. The question is, where are the funds for the ferry system spent, or where are they allocated? What are they allocated for?
Well, obviously, the simple answer is they're allocating the budget. Here's the problem. The ferry system headquarters, every year, when it's doing this right now, is building a budget and looks at how much it needs to extract from the toll payers, sends that budget to the governor, puts it in, sends it over to the legislature. When the wheels finally finish cranking out, the legislature puts one line in the ferry budget that says, this is how much money tolls will generate. Nobody's involved in that. Citizens are not involved, community is not involved, and nobody knows what was inside those books. So I have been proposing bills and changing procedures for some years to try to open that up. One way to do that is by using what we use down on the bridge, in the Narrows Bridge, is with the Citizens Advisory Committee. Before we reset the tolls on the toll bridge, the community sees what the budget is. The community weighs in on where they want to go. We need to do that for the ferry system, because right now this is a temple of rubber numbers. Christine Rolfes says it's a black box. We don't know what's inside those ferry numbers. That needs to change.
Thank you. Michelle, is there any question? If you would like, I'm happy to repeat the question at any time.
Yeah.
The question is, where are the funds for the ferry system spent, or where are they allocated for? What are they allocated for?
You know, it's funny because there's a lot of problems going on in Olympia. And, you know, we can't really blame every single one of those problems on my opponent, Mr. Seacrest. I mean, that's not fair. But there are 2 problems that he is responsible for. Number 1 is the ferry crisis, and number 2 is higher education. Those are things that he has taken leadership on. And I mean, I think we can kind of take a look at, you know, facts. Let's look at facts. So, are things better today than they were before he took office? I mean, come on now. We've got, it's a joke as to how much money goes into not only waste, mistakes, but in over costs to make the ferries. And he's part of the problem. And he sits there and says it's baloney and hogwash. If it was baloney and hogwash, why are you accepting money from this company? Come on now. I mean, this is a joke. And that's the thing, is I want accountability, and he's part of the problem. I'll be part of the solution.
Thank you. And we're not quite out of the ferries yet. We got a few more folks, and just make sure we keep everyone going here. So this question just simply is, to you, Michelle, why are Washington State ferries more expensive to build than anywhere else in America?
Okay? Well, like I said before, their legislature passed a law making it so that the way that the contracts work, only one company qualified, and that is bigger corporations, okay? Now, the last ferries that were built cost about $80 million to build. Okay, Martha Vineyards is a comparative company, competitor, and for the exact same ferry, it is $32 million to build that ferry. Okay, that is $48 million more. And I think what we have to do is we have to ask ourselves, well, why is that? Why is it? In fact, you go look in the news, and we have the most expensive ferries built in our state. And why is that? Well, maybe it's because there's a problem with our legislature that allowed this to happen. And maybe it's because that same exact company is one of my opponent's top donors.
And then Larry, please, same question.
So just briefly back to the democracy issue. The kinds of problems that we have, including fixing the ferry system, require adult, thoughtful fixes to some very complicated problems. Blaming somebody is the problem that the legislature has had for the last 2 or 3 years. That's why it hasn't done what it needs to do. Let me talk about why are ferries so expensive. We have a building Washington law here that says if the taxpayers are going to spend their money on building ferries, the ferries ought to be built in Washington shipyards. We have a strategic interest, whether it's a union or a private yard. We have lots of both. They're very good yards. The problem has been that the ferry system headquarters insists on designing the boats in-house. They don't go out like normal government contractors with an RFP and saying, I'd like to have a ferry, what have you got, how much it would cost? And that's where I, in fact, entered the legislature, was to try to figure out how we could get that going. So I actually passed a law, but got it out of the House, which completely reformed the way we did ferry construction. I just met last week with the Senate Republican head of transportation, agreeing that we'll try that again next year.
Thank you, Larry. Okay, so honestly, last ferry question.
Okay, no, I like ferry questions.
Okay, and this goes to you, Larry. The question is, given all that you've shared today, what is your preference for funding of our ferry system?
Well, listen, this is a very important thing. I want to make sure that I hear what Dr. Caldier's answer to this question is. We need to fund that transportation package, the gas tax increase. Make no mistake about that. If we do not do that, we are going to starve our ferry system to death. We've got an old ferry system which is running on fumes right now. It's understaffed because they haven't been spending money on personnel because of mismanagement and leadership, and it is way underfunded in operations. So either you're going to see a phenomenal increase in fares, or we're going to see our ferry system begin to drift away into no service. We don't have anymore the once-an-hour service in Bremerton that you used to have. You knew what time the ferry to Seattle was. It was on the hour every day. Okay? That's what we need to do, is to fully fund the operations of the ferry system. We've got the basic ingredients of a fix on construction if we can only make sure the ferry system does good constructing procedures and doesn't design in-house.
Michelle?
So, like I said before, look at the facts. I mean, he's taken leadership and ownership of the ferry system, said it's been not managed well, and these are kind of driving up some of the costs. He's been there for almost a decade. And are things better off today than they were a decade ago? Come on now. It is a third of our transportation's budget. That's $483.5 million per biennium. That's not including the amount that it costs to make these ferries. Now, he sits there and says, well, we just need to pass more, get more gas dollars and everything else in order to fund it. There's a lot of money that's there. It's not being spent wisely. And I think if we have people in Olympia, instead of having their hands in part of the pockets, I think we need to have honest people elected who can help solve the problem.
Thank you. All right, so now we're talking about money. Let's see, we got quite a few questions about money. Let's start with this one. This is a real simple question. With you, Michelle, please. The question from the audience member is, would you propose a state income tax to support budget constraints?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I think that we have so much money that we have going on, going to Olympia, the money is not being spent wisely. Okay? For example, you say, okay, well, wait a second here. We got to fund the Cleary, that there's all these things. What are you going to cut, Michelle? Everyone keeps asking, what are you going to cut? I'm going to tell you, okay? I'm going to go and I'm going to look at every single thing and say, are we utilizing the money efficiently? For example, I did a lot of research for the dental organization, and one of the things that I found was that for every person who goes into a community health clinic, okay, they get money per encounter. What that means is that every single time they come in, our tax dollars, it costs $270 to $330 every time they walk through the door, which is far more than what a private practice dentist would get, which is why a lot of people do not take Medicaid as part of that whole thing. So here we are, we have our community health clinics, and it costs $270 to $330 per encounter. What they were finding is that they, in order to generate more revenue, they were having parents come multiple times and doing $20 fluoride applications. So it was costing us taxpayers $20, or what would normally cost the taxpayers $20, it was costing between $270 and $330 per time. That's not right.
Thank you. And Larry, same question.
So the short answer around the income tax, and this will disappoint some of my Democrat friends, is absolutely not. I'm strongly opposed to an income tax. So is the state's constitution. The Supreme Court has ruled 2 or 3 times. The voters have voted several times. We're not going to have an income tax. What we do need to do, however, is have fundamental tax reform next session that both Republicans in the Senate and people in the House agree that we can fundamentally reform, which is a highly dysfunctional tax system. Our sales tax system is highly regressive, so that poor people pay most of the freight, and our B&O tax really damages our businesses. We need to fix those things. Now, this business about savings is very important. You do not, here's how, just to give you a higher ed examples, you know I chair the higher ed committee. Next session, I need about $1.5 billion if I'm going to do 3 things. Increase throughput. We need more college degrees, apprenticeships, 6-month diplomas. We need all those things. I need $1.5 billion in order to cut tuition, increase throughput, increase quality. But we've already done these savings things. We took so much money out of the cops that we're 100 state troopers short. We took so much money out of health care that the Supreme Court told us to put money back in.
Thank you, Larry. So we'll keep you up there with the next question. Has to do with staying on the same issue of taxes, which is what would a gas tax be for and how would it benefit Kitsap County? Second question of that is, would it change the bridge tolls?
Yes, so good question. And this is the only reason why I voted for and would vote again for the gas tax. What this means for us here in Kitsap County is with that toll, transportation package, that we would be able to have a fully funded ferry system. We would be able to add back foot ferries so that we begin to add comprehensive service, and we would be able to roll back and cap the tolls on the bridge. Now, everybody, I'm sure here, there's not a person in this room that doesn't periodically go across the bridge, maybe not twice a day like I do, but everybody does. Right now, that bridge toll is scheduled to continue climbing over the next few years to above $6. It's way too high already. And the reason it's too high is that the state isn't sharing in helping pay for the bridge. We're paying 100%. We're the only major construction project in the state where we pay with our own tolls for our own major project. So my proposal, my insistence, they won't get my vote, is that we roll back to $4, cap at $4, and that gas tax from the state, they share with us just like we're sharing in Bertha, we're sharing in 520, we share in roads, we want them to share, and that's what we're going to get out of that package.
Thank you. Same question, Michelle.
So I met with Lynn Peterson, and she, with the Washington State Department of Transportation, she said, here's my top 3 priorities. Okay? Number 1 is to fix some of our roads so that we prevent future problems. Okay, fair enough. Number 2 is to finish our current projects, like the Highway 167. Fair enough. Number 3 is to prioritize the remaining projects based on their safety. Okay, Comanar's Bridge is already built. Ferry system's already there. Okay, when if the gas tax is passed, there are 147 legislators who are going to want their piece of the pie, and very little of it is going to go to our district. You know, and I'm sorry, but just because he's funded by Walmart doesn't mean he can roll back the prices on the Comanar's Bridge like Walmart can. Okay, sorry, it's not going to happen. And I'm here to advocate for the people in my district, not for my buddies in Olympia.
Thank you. So now let's move on to issues regarding collective bargaining. So how do you, this goes to Michelle, how do you feel about collective bargaining with state employees, unions, being done in open session instead of in secret?
So, you know, I am an advocate of having people all come together and saying, you know, exactly what their viewpoints are, and coming together collectively in order to advocate for themselves. And that's one of the things that I did as well, going down to Olympia, is it wasn't just me as a single dentist going down there trying to change this. It was multiple dentists, and it felt so good to have, you know, being able to have that feeling that you could make a difference and that you could stand up for what you believe in. And really, honestly, that's what our country was founded on, was people standing up for what they believe in. And I'm a huge advocate of that.
Thank you. Larry, same question.
So, in our mix of state employees, both the state employees and the people who work in the private sector, a mix of union and non-union people is very good, very healthy for our economy. And obviously under federal statutes, there are bargaining rules. I personally, while respecting those, would like to see a little bit more openness about where those processes are. And we'll see next what the governor decides to do about pay increases. I want to go back just a minute to this idea that you just heard that about the voting and whether or not who controls the budget on the tax package. When we got to the place where the 10.5-cent package last February was ready to go, February 2013, I was the last holdout. I was not going to vote for that package unless I had ferry money, unless I had 167 money. And we have now, what I've organized among all of us in the West Sound District is a voting block so that we will be able to control that vote and not let that tax package go through without Republicans and Democrats on this side of the water agreeing what's going to be in that package.
Thank you. Okay, so now we move to collective bargaining, and let's move on. We're in human services area. Let's ask you, we have some audience questions about that. So going to Larry, what would you do to stop the decrease in social caseworkers for those eligible for developmental disabilities and low-income senior services? In other words, how would you lower the high caseloads?
We've got, it's part of this coming through very hard times, places where we were squeezing everything too hard, including mental health, was to really crank down too far on the support, but the in-home health care. Those folks, their hours have been cutting back. We have really damaged the well-being of a lot of our citizens. So the short answer is we need in the next budget, as the economy is growing, to see those investments go back into those social services areas. We all need something else. We need to see a hell of a lot more efficiency out of DSHS. They've got the same disease that the ferry system has, which is too many bosses, too few Indians. And with apologies to my tribal friends for that. We have this boss infection, and particularly in DSHS, of layer after layer of leaders. I've been working with the state employees union, WFC, to continue to attack and downsize that outsize layer of executives in DSHS.
Thank you. Same question, Michelle?
So one of my whole passions is improving care for our seniors. And in fact, that's one of the whole reasons as to why I even went down to Olympia to begin with. You know, I got off my comfy couch and went down there and started fighting and advocating for our seniors. It is a very passionate about improving their care. And so I'm a huge advocate of that there's certain groups of people that we need to take care of that cannot take care of themselves, and one of those is our seniors. And so I will do whatever it takes in order to make sure that they have a voice, because it's not being heard in Olympia. You know, there is a lot of inefficiencies. You know, for example, you know, one of the things is like denture pre-authorizations, for example. You know, that's one of the areas where I found that there was just a lot of waste, a lot of cumbersome, and that's something that I can do is to help streamline some of the, the rules and regulations that they have in order to get their service. I want to reduce those.
Thank you. So this issue has to do, I guess it's hypothetical. The audience member asked, what specifically would you plan for health care in Washington for the hundreds of thousands of working citizens who would not have affordable health care without the Affordable Care Act expanded Medicaid and would end up back in the emergency rooms?
That has a lot of different layers to it, okay? So first of all, I mean, one thing is to address, what I call the Unaffordable Health Care Act, okay? And really what that involved was that you have for-profit insurance companies, and, unfortunately, our government decided that we were going to utilize these for-profit insurance companies, ones that are always on the Forbes top list, and to say, hey, this is going to be our way to make sure that health care is available for everybody in our state. And so what happens, I mean, you have people like me where not only did I lose my health care insurance plan, which I was told I wasn't going to, but whatever, but now it's 3 times the cost of what it was before. Okay, that's not right. And the thing is, I've had story after story of people who are struggling and they cannot make those premiums. And in addition, it's a freaking joke. Our state, the way that we have it set up with the exchange, money is going into the exchange and it's not getting to the insurance company. So there's a lot of people where they're not able to get their insurance and they even pay for it because it's a total joke. And I think I can help with that.
Thank you. Larry, same question?
So it's very interesting. Just in the last few days, the Financial Times, New York Times Press has been reporting the results of a Federal Reserve Board study of the financial impact of the Affordable Care Act. And it is causing more savings and reducing costs faster than anyone expected. In fact, the political cartoonist this morning in the Washington Post has got a cartoon with the Republicans saying, this is a terrible, and the other person saying, yeah, but the costs are going down. Says, but I say it's terrible. And you just saw a living example of the Washington Post cartoon this morning. Now, here's the problem that we face. Here's the legislative problem. Well, Affordable Care Act is cutting our costs, thank God, by hundreds of millions of dollars. The problem we've got is that we have a paucity of rural docs, rural nurses, rural health dental care people. And we need, among other things, urgently to expand the number of residencies, particularly in the Tri-Cities in Eastern Washington. That has been my #1 ask. I just went to the leadership again last night, reminding them we've got to go in that direction. I talked with Representative Larry Haler, my counterpart out in Tri-Cities, about that. We're trying to fix that problem right now.
Okay, thank you, Larry. So now, the last question on human services specifically is, how would you fund the mental health demands from the Supreme Court ruling?
The short one-word answer is fully. And it's not just because you happen to run. This gentleman, by the way, if we can change him to example instead of moderator, Joe Rozak and I went to DSHS's previous administration. He had hatched a way here in Kitsap County of delivering mental health services on a locally led, locally organized basis. That has now, with the new administration, with Governor Inslee's administration, has become the way we're heading to do this in the state. So the first thing we need to do after we put money back into ASAP, into mental health care, is to follow the Rozak initiatives. Now, the immediate thing that the governor is not doing, to my taste, fast enough, he's hedging on this, is reopen space at Western Hospital. We've got plenty of empty beds there. They should be used. We should figure out where that money is going to come from right now, put the legislature back into session if we need to do that, and fix it. And go listen to Dr. Schlicker if you'd like to hear the first-hand example of how important that is.
Thank you. And Michelle, same question.
So I look at mental health, funding as, basically if we don't fund it, it will generate more problems in the future. And what that means is that's when, people start harming others or harming themselves. and there's increased costs with that. So, like I said before, there are certain groups of people that I think we definitely need to take care of, and one of those is our mentally ill.
Right. Okay, so now moving on from human services to the long-awaited issue of education. So the question is, how would you comply with the McCleary decision to fully fund schools?
Okay. So my daughter goes to South Kitsap High School, and proper education funding not only affects families across our state, but affects my family directly as well. The McCleary decision, there's a couple components to it. One is to properly fund it, and then the other one is to make sure that there's certain reforms in place so we don't wind up in the same problem. And basically I say number one, we need to create a separate education budget, K through 12, and we need to fund it first. Okay? We prioritize it just like we would prioritize our mortgage and our household income. Number two is we need to have certain levy reforms. Right now, our school districts are so dependent on those levies that it equates to about a third of our teachers. That's not right. That's too risky, and that's not right. And number three is we need to have some compensation reform. Right now, there is one flat fee across our state, and I think that we need to make it so that there's different changes for local areas so that teachers are able to live where they work.
Thank you. Larry, same question.
Read the question again, Joe, to make sure I'm on the track.
Question
What
is-
the question I wanted to ask.
Certainly. Question is, how would you comply with the McCleary decision to fully fund schools?
So the court, there's a narrow answer to McCleary and the real answer. The narrow answer has got lawyers standing on both sides of it about the four things that have to be funded. That's about $2 billion in the next budget, $4 billion more by 2018, when the court said we have to meet our own deadline. The problem is that the legislature has actually screwed up. It's not really a money problem. It's a rules and regulations and tests and feds. We have so complicated the teaching in our classrooms that our teachers not only are short of money and are being underpaid, but they are burdened with what are a lot of good ideas, but simply have made the business of teaching well impossible. So my main advocacy, in addition to insisting that we fully fund education, including the $1.5 billion I need for higher ed, is to get the feds out of the classroom, get the legislature to back away from the classroom, and let teachers and principals run their schools well.
Thank you. Okay, so staying on the same question, same issue, I should say, same topic. The audience member asked, will you work to restore educators' COLA? Educators have not had a cost of living adjustment for 6 going on 7 years.
The answer is hell yes, but COLA is not enough. So understand, 6 years ago when the economy crashed thanks to these reckless Wall Street bankers, we froze state employee, we froze teacher pay. At one point we reduced teacher pay by 3%. At that point, I reduced my own pay unilaterally 5% so that I was participating in that. So what we need to do is fully fund the real cost of being a teacher, what you want for high quality people. So I've been proposing this bill that we would set legislator salaries at $1 less than the statewide average pay of a starting elementary school teacher, to make sure the legislators knew how much you got paid if you started teaching your kids in school. That would move us from 42,100 down to about 32,000. People do not understand that these teachers have been living on very short rations. Their healthcare costs have been going up. We've got teachers on food stamps. That's wrong. We need to do a lot more than just raise COLA.
Thank you, Larry. And Michelle, same question, please.
So my opponent's a very, very, very good politician. And I think that's a perfect example because, while he's been in office, up until the last 2 years, and in fact, actually for decades, Democrats have had control of both the House, the Senate, and also had a Democratic governor. They had control over the budget, over making sure that education was properly funded, and guess what? A year after my opponent got into office, teachers lost their COLAs. So he's had ample opportunity to restore those COLAs. And that bill he was talking about, it actually mentioned that it would be a science elementary school teacher. And guess what? There is no such thing as a science elementary school teacher. And so that's part of the problem, is the solutions he comes up with are so inefficient, they don't make sense, and they don't go anywhere. And I am a huge advocate for teachers. I'm very pro-teachers. I have a lot of teachers, local teachers, who've not only supported my campaign, but are advocating for me as well and have endorsed me. And I will go down to Olympia and I will make sure that teachers get proper pay.
Thank you. All right, Michelle, this question is twofold still around education. Why has college tuition doubled the last 6 years, and how or what would you do to help students in Washington State afford education in the future?
So like I said before, there's a lot of problems in Olympia, and we cannot blame Mr. Sequist for every single one of them. That's not right. However, there are two problems that he is directly responsible for, okay? Number one is higher education, and then the other one is the ferry crisis that we're in. He has served as chair of the Higher Ed Committee, and from 2006 to 2012, when there's been a Democratic majority in the House, the Senate, and Democratic governor, he has more than doubled the tuition. I'm an affiliate professor at the University of Washington, and let me tell you something. My students, from when they started to where they are now, their tuition has doubled while they've been in school. They're graduating with $300,000 to $400,000 of student loan debt. That's not right. That's not right. And my daughter's getting ready for college, and I'm telling you right now, it's very expensive.
Thank you. Larry, same question.
I'm glad to hear that I'm not in charge of all of the potholes in the state. So, 4 years ago, I was invited to shift from healthcare, where I had been spending my committee time, healthcare, youth welfare, and so on, over to run the Higher Ed Committee. And at that point, I found that the legislature had been taking money out. There was a little red line on the chart. The red line was the higher ed funding. The blue line was social services and so on. The red line was going through the floor on the chart. If you go back and look at that chart, when I arrived, that red line turned out. I've been responsible for putting about $500 million back in. I have been responsible, you may have noticed in the newspaper across the weekend, that the GET program is now completely healthy. We have 157,000 families with more than $1 billion committed that the state is managing through the investment fund, of people who have already paid for their kids' college. There was a proposal coming from the other side to actually destroy the GET program. There's another, I stopped that, and that program is now healthy. There is a proposal to try to kill this wonderful college-bound program that is helping poor kids go to college. I'm stopping that this summer too. So I've been part of the solution, not part of the problem.
Thank you, Mr. Seacrest. Okay, so with that, we have down to the last two questions, and they're relatively quick questions, potentially. The question is, the first one is, do you support our right to bear arms? This goes to Larry.
Of course. I used to own and operate the biggest guns in the world. I'm a pretty damn good shot myself, and so the answer is yes. Let me answer the question underneath that is, how would I vote on 594 versus 591? Again, I'm going to disappoint some of my Democrat friends. I'm going to vote no. You are going to be faced in the ballot with these two competing gun control initiatives. Yes and no. More registration, no registration. Both of them, in my view, are defective, and the thing that I'm interested in is the mental health, the health care, the public health system that is able to find people who are unstable. It's not more rules and regulations about guns.
Thank you. Michelle, same question.
So, you know, I agree with my opponent on this one. You know, the public safety is a huge priority of mine, and that's why I go along with the police and sheriffs, and I oppose 594. I would love to see, right now there's about $7 million that's getting dumped into you know, this initiative. It would be really nice to see that $7 million actually going to something worthwhile and maybe helping some of the mental health problems problems that we have in our state.
Thank you. Michelle, this question is the last question, which came from our audience member, is do you support the death penalty?
Here's the thing, is in Washington State, okay, we're not Texas. In Washington State, in the last 10 years, we have only executed one person. That's it. In the last 50 years, we've only executed 5 people. And that's because there is so many checks and balances along the way. And it just so happens that every single person that we have executed in our state, they have not been exonerated, meaning that they've been found guilty and no one else has been later able to prove it. We're not Texas. We don't, execute everybody, but I do believe that we should reserve certain, the capital punishment for certain heinous crimes. And I think it is, I'm very disappointed with Governor Inslee in his unilateral decision to reject the will of the people and to put a moratorium on this.
Thank you. Larry, last question.
So again, this is my wife and I talked about this, and we disagree on this. She'll watch the TV and I'll hear about it. My view is that there are certain crimes so heinous that it seems to me that even a democracy needs to have the capital punishment option on the books. But if you talk to the prosecutors, to Russ Hauge and his counterpart, the sheriffs, you will find that all of them are telling you, don't do that very much. It is so expensive, it is so protracted that real justice almost never happens when you go for a capital trial. So I think it needs to stay on the books, but I agree with the prosecutors and the sheriffs that we ought not to do that very much at all in our state.
Thank you. And that concludes our question and answers from the audience. I tried to gather as much as I can. I have a lot of extra questions here, but I keep you all here way past our time, and I'm past time already. So now we're actually to the summary part. Candidates get 2 minutes to give a summary statement to address whatever they want, at which point the blue sign will come up when you have 30 seconds left, and then red at the end. So Michelle, you start, so I'm going to let Larry begin for summary. Thank you.
There's some things we haven't talked about. We haven't talked about the environment, about acidification. We haven't talked about marijuana and some other urgent things that need to be considered. As I've listened this morning, I am listening to Dr. Caldier trying to write us 3 bad prescriptions. She is telling us, if you listen carefully to what she said about the ferry system, of finding efficiencies in a ferry system which is so radically underfunded. We could barely afford the fares to get on the boat, and we can't afford the full cruise. She is writing you a prescription to basically shut down our ferry system. She is writing you a prescription to basically handicap and paralyze our education system. This fund education first little phrase that you heard in there, that's code word for there's so much money in the schools that they will find deficiencies. Now, should they find efficiencies? Of course they should. But she is trying to write you a prescription to kill our schools. I object to that. And finally, the prescription that she has tried to write throughout this debate this morning is a prescription to continue a democracy, which is not a democracy. It's simply an argument society of people who hate each other. I'm strongly opposed to that. What I would like to see come out of this election by the time we get to November is a set of people who are no longer exhausted by petty politics, by people who think that we actually can work together to solve these kinds of problems of education, healthcare, transportation, capping bridge tolls. We can do all those things if we do not take this approach to politics or campaigns or to being in the legislature. So what I would like from you is not only your vote. I am hoping that during this campaign, we, with your help, will be able to get all of our neighbors deeply invested again in participating in our democracy. Thank you.
Thank you. And Michelle, your 2 minutes, please.
So that was a very interesting pose. I mean, so of the 3 prescriptions, let me see here. Supposedly I'm going to kill ferries, yet I'm a ferry commuter and I use the ferry every day. Why on earth would I ever do that? Let's see, I want to kill education when, my my children or my grandchildren are in schools. I mean, that, and I'm a teacher myself, that doesn't make any sense. You know, I think that that's part of the problem with my opponent is he kind of misses the boat entirely on a lot of things. And one of those is basically, I just want efficiency with what we have. You know, and I mean, for me, I'm a huge advocate of being very honest about what's going on. You know, the simple fact that he collects money from the same company who has a monopoly in our state and charges 2.5 times more for those ferries, I think that says a lot about who he is and where his motives are. You know, and I started down this whole path, and I just wanted to make a difference. I wanted to run for office. I didn't actually even know who Mr. Sieg was before I ran for office. And in fact, I actually have a lot of respect for him and for all the years of service he's done. You know, it wasn't until I started kind of digging in deeper and looking into some of these problems and really seeing as to where his money's coming from and who's actually supporting him. I want to say about 90% of his money comes from special interests. You know, whereas my money comes from the people. I think that's what it should be all about. And so, I mean, I'm sorry, that's kind of where we disagree. Like I said before, I have the utmost respect for my opponent and for the years of service he's given. I just want to make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you. So that concludes our exit issues for today. Just hold it. I just real quickly a reminder that next week we had our county clerk scheduled, and